The morning sun cast long shadows across the red sandstone cliffs of Moab, Utah, as 15-year-old Tyler Brennan adjusted his backpack straps one final time. The autumn air carried the scent of juniper and sage, and the vast expanse of Arches National Park stretched before him like an ancient cathedral of stone. His parents, David and Margaret Brennan, stood nearby, watching their son prepare for what was supposed to be a routine solo hike. A coming-of-age tradition in their family that had been passed down for generations. The temperature hovered around 55 degrees, perfect hiking weather that promised to warm into the 70s by midday, with crystal-clear skies that stretched endlessly over the Colorado Plateau. Tyler had been planning this hike for months, studying topographical maps and trail guides with the methodical precision of someone far beyond his years. The delicate arch trail was well marked and heavily traveled, a 3-mile round trip that thousands of tourists completed safely every year. As an experienced hiker who had conquered dozens of trails throughout Colorado and Utah with his family, Tyler felt confident in his abilities. His father had taught him wilderness survival skills from an early age, including how to read weather patterns, find water sources, and signal for help in emergency situations. His mother had instilled in him a deep respect for the natural world and its unpredictable dangers, always emphasizing the importance of preparation and caution when venturing into the wilderness alone. The Brennan family had arrived in Moab 3 days earlier, part of their annual autumn camping trip that had become a cherished tradition over the past decade. They had driven down from their home in Denver, taking the scenic route through the Rocky Mountains and across the Colorado River, stopping at familiar landmarks and sharing stories about previous adventures. They had set up camp at Devil's Garden Campground, where the night sky exploded with stars, unmarred by city lights, and coyotes sang their haunting songs in the distance, while great horned owls called from hidden perches in the twisted juniper trees. Tyler had spent those first days exploring easier trails with his parents, photographing the otherworldly landscape with his new digital camera, a 16th birthday gift he had received early for this special trip. Before we continue with Tyler's story, we'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Your support helps us bring you more of these compelling, true stories. David Brennan, a civil engineer who specialized in water resource management, had always been protective of his only son while encouraging his independence and love of the outdoors. He'd grown up in rural Montana, learning to hunt and fish from his grandfather, and he was determined to pass those same skills and values to Tyler. Margaret, a high school biology teacher, shared her husband's passion for nature and had spent countless hours teaching Tyler about desert ecology, plant identification, and animal behavior. Together, they had created a young man who was both academically gifted and practically skilled, someone who could discuss photosynthesis and cellular respiration with equal fluency as he could start a fire with flint and steel, or navigate using only a compass and topographical map. On that crisp October morning in 2011, Tyler set out alone at 7:30 a.m., carrying a day pack with 3 liters of water, energy bars, trail mix, a first aid kit, and his GPS device. His parents watched him disappear around the first bend in the trail, his confident stride and familiar whistle echoing off the canyon walls. Tyler was wearing his favorite hiking boots, sturdy leather vasques that he had broken in over 2 summers of backpacking, along with khaki shorts, a moisture-wicking t-shirt, and a lightweight fleece jacket tied around his waist. His backpack also contained a headlamp, extra batteries, a space blanket, and a whistle for emergency signaling, following the 10 essentials checklist that his father had drilled into him since childhood. They had agreed he would return by noon, giving him plenty of time to complete the hike and enjoy some photography along the way. Tyler planned to reach Delicate Arch by 10 a.m., spend an hour taking photographs and sketching in his journal, then return leisurely to camp for lunch. Margaret remembered feeling a brief moment of maternal anxiety as she watched her son's figure grow smaller in the distance, but she quickly dismissed it. Tyler was responsible, well prepared, and hiking a trail that park rangers described as suitable for children. The weather forecast called for sunny skies and mild temperatures throughout the day, with no chance of the flash floods or sudden storms that could make desert hiking dangerous. David spent the morning organizing their camping gear and planning afternoon activities, while Margaret worked on lesson plans for her advanced placement biology classes. They had brought folding chairs and a small table, creating a comfortable outdoor workspace where Margaret could grade papers while enjoying the spectacular views of red rock formations and distant snow-capped peaks. The campground was moderately busy with other families enjoying the perfect autumn weather, and the atmosphere was relaxed and cheerful as children played on nearby trails and adults shared coffee and conversation around picnic tables. Neither parent felt any sense of urgency or concern as the morning progressed and Tyler's estimated return time approached. By 2 p.m., when Tyler hadn't returned, David began walking the trail backward, expecting to meet his son coming down from the arch. He carried extra water and snacks, thinking Tyler might have extended his hike or stopped to help other hikers who needed assistance, something their son was known to do. The trail was busier now, filled with families and tour groups from around the world, their excited conversations echoing in multiple languages off the sandstone walls. David questioned dozens of hikers, describing Tyler's appearance and showing them a recent photograph. But none of them had seen a teenage boy hiking alone. He reached Delicate Arch and found several tourists taking photographs under the famous natural formation, but no sign of Tyler. A growing knot of worry formed in his stomach as he called his son's name, his voice bouncing off the massive stone formations without response, absorbed by the vast silence of the desert. The arch itself stood majestically against the azure sky, its impossible span of sandstone seeming to defy gravity as it framed the distant La Salle Mountains. David climbed to every vantage point around the formation, using his binoculars to scan the surrounding landscape for any sign of movement or distress signals. He checked the visitor's log at the viewpoint, hoping Tyler might have signed in, but found no entry matching his son's name or description. Other tourists at the arch were sympathetic and helpful, some offering to assist in the search or to contact park rangers on their cell phones, though cellular service in the remote location was sporadic at best. As shadows began to lengthen and the afternoon light took on the golden quality that photographers prized, David's casual concern transformed into genuine alarm. Margaret contacted park rangers at 3 p.m., and within an hour a search operation was underway. The initial search focused on the Delicate Arch Trail and surrounding areas, with rangers and volunteers combing every possible route Tyler might have taken. Ranger Janet Morrison, a 20-year veteran of search and rescue operations, immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation and began coordinating resources from multiple agencies. Search and rescue teams from Grand County joined the effort as daylight began to fade, using dogs trained to track human scent and helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras. The searchers worked through the night, their flashlights creating dancing shadows on the canyon walls as they called Tyler's name into the darkness, their voices seeming small and ineffective against the immensity of the desert landscape. The search teams were methodical and professional, following established protocols for missing person cases in national park settings. They divided the area into grid sections, with each team responsible for thoroughly searching designated zones while maintaining radio contact with the command post. The helicopter crews used forward-looking infrared cameras to detect heat signatures that might indicate a person in distress, while ground teams focused on areas where someone might seek shelter or become trapped. K-9 units worked to establish Tyler's scent trail from his last known location, though the dry desert air and constant wind made tracking more challenging than it would have been in forested environments. As dawn broke over the red rock landscape, revealing a searcher network that had expanded to include over 50 people, the absence of any concrete clues became increasingly ominous. The search expanded dramatically over the following days, eventually covering over 50 square miles of rugged desert terrain that included slot canyons, mesa tops, and hidden alcoves that had sheltered ancient peoples for thousands of years. Volunteers came from across Utah and neighboring states, including experienced climbers, local guides, and other families who had heard about the missing teenager on the news. The Brennan family established a command post at their campsite, where Margaret maintained detailed logs of search activities while David coordinated with different teams and studied topographical maps with obsessive intensity. Tyler's story began appearing on local news stations and missing person websites, his smiling face becoming familiar to thousands of people across the American West who followed the case with growing concern and sympathy. Professional search teams brought sophisticated equipment, including ground-penetrating radar, acoustic listening devices, and drone aircraft equipped with high-resolution cameras. The terrain presented unique challenges, with its maze-like network of slot canyons, sheer cliff faces, and areas accessible only to experienced technical climbers. Searchers rappelled into narrow crevices barely wide enough for a human body, explored hidden chambers behind fallen boulders, and climbed to remote ledges where someone might have fallen or become stranded. The weather remained cooperative, with clear skies and mild temperatures that favored search operations, though the approaching winter season added urgency to the effort, as conditions would soon become more difficult and dangerous for both searchers and anyone who might be surviving in the wilderness. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility that Tyler had simply gotten lost on the main trail. His GPS device would have guided him back, and the trail was well marked with signs and cairns placed by Park Service maintenance crews. The search teams discovered Tyler's water bottle about 2 miles from the Delicate Arch Trail, near a less-traveled area called the Fiery Furnace, a labyrinthine maze of narrow sandstone canyons that required permits and guided tours for most visitors. The bottle was found wedged between 2 rocks in a narrow slot canyon, its position suggesting it had been dropped or abandoned rather than carefully placed. The discovery sent a chill through the search teams, as the Fiery Furnace was notorious for its disorienting passages and hidden dangers that had claimed the lives of experienced hikers in previous years. The water bottle was immediately secured as evidence and tested for fingerprints, DNA, and any other clues that might provide information about Tyler's fate. The location where it was found became the focal point for intensive searching, with teams mapping every possible route Tyler might have taken from the main trail to that remote slot canyon. Investigators theorized that Tyler might have been attracted by something he wanted to photograph, perhaps ancient petroglyphs, unusual rock formations, or wildlife, and had ventured off the designated trail system without realizing how quickly he could become disoriented in the maze-like terrain. The bottle's condition suggested it had been exposed to the elements for several days, supporting the timeline of Tyler's disappearance and eliminating the possibility that it had been planted by someone trying to mislead the search effort. Search dogs were brought to the location where the water bottle was discovered, and they detected Tyler's scent in several directions, leading deeper into the Fiery Furnace complex. However, the scent trails were fragmented and inconsistent, possibly due to wind patterns, rain that had fallen several days after Tyler's disappearance, or the complex air currents that moved unpredictably through the narrow canyon passages. The search teams followed every possible lead, but the terrain became increasingly technical and dangerous as they moved deeper into the maze. Several searchers had to be rescued themselves when they became disoriented or stuck in narrow passages, highlighting the extreme difficulty of the environment and the remarkable challenge that Tyler would have faced if he had indeed ventured into this area alone. The discovery of the water bottle shifted the search focus to the fiery furnace area, where the landscape became exponentially more treacherous, and the possibilities for what might have happened to Tyler multiplied dramatically. The narrow passages between towering rock walls created a three-dimensional maze where even experienced hikers could become disoriented within minutes of entering. Flash floods could fill these canyons with deadly walls of water within seconds, even from storms miles away, and the slot canyons contained numerous natural traps where someone could fall or become wedged between rocks. Search teams rappelled into deep crevices and explored hidden alcoves, finding occasional footprints in sandy areas that might have belonged to Tyler. But the trail always seemed to disappear on the hard sandstone surfaces that dominated the landscape. The psychological toll on the search teams was significant, as many of the volunteers were parents themselves who could easily imagine the agony that David and Margaret were experiencing. Local businesses donated food, equipment and lodging for searchers who had traveled from distant locations, while churches and community organizations provided emotional support for the Brennan family. The media coverage attracted national attention, with several television news magazines sending crews to document the search effort and interview family members about their experience. However, as each day passed without significant discoveries, the hope that Tyler might be found alive began to diminish. Though search coordinators maintained their professional optimism while privately preparing for the possibility that this would become a recovery operation rather than a rescue mission. Weather conditions remained favorable for search operations throughout the first week, but meteorologists warned that seasonal storms were approaching and would make helicopter operations dangerous while reducing visibility for ground teams. The urgency to find Tyler intensified as search coordinators realized that winter weather would effectively end large-scale search operations until spring. Snow was already falling at higher elevations, and temperatures were dropping into the 20s at night, conditions that would be fatal for anyone exposed without proper shelter and equipment. The search area was expanded once more to include even more remote possibilities, including abandoned mine shafts, natural caves, and seasonal water sources where someone might have sought refuge. But the vast scale of the landscape made comprehensive coverage virtually impossible, even with all available resources deployed. As days turned into weeks, the official search was gradually scaled back due to resource limitations and the decreasing probability of finding Tyler alive, though the Brennan family refused to accept this reality or abandon their desperate hope. They remained in Moab, transforming their temporary campsite into a semi-permanent base of operations, while posting flyers throughout the town and organizing private search parties with volunteers who continued to believe Tyler could be found. Margaret started a blog documenting their search efforts, sharing Tyler's story with online communities dedicated to missing persons cases and connecting with other families who had experienced similar tragedies. The blog attracted followers from around the world, including professional searchers who offered advice and resources, psychics who claimed to have visions about Tyler's location, and well-meaning individuals who shared their own theories about what might have happened. David took extended leave from his job as a civil engineer in Denver, using his technical skills and analytical mind to create detailed maps marking every area that had been searched and identifying potential locations that might have been overlooked by the organized search teams. He studied geological surveys and historical accounts of the region, learning about hidden springs and seasonal water sources where someone with survival skills might be able to sustain themselves for extended periods. The couple spent their life savings on private search teams, specialized equipment, and helicopter surveys, driven by an unshakable conviction that their son was still alive somewhere in the vast wilderness, possibly injured or trapped, but waiting for rescue with the patience and determination they had taught him. The case attracted attention from national media outlets and missing persons advocacy groups, generating thousands of tips and reported sightings from across the western United States, though each lead ultimately proved to be false hope based on mistaken identity or wishful thinking. Professional investigators joined the effort, including former FBI agents and private detectives who specialized in missing person cases, but even their expertise and resources failed to produce the breakthrough that the Brennan family desperately needed. As months passed without new developments, public interest began to wane despite the family's continued efforts to keep Tyler's story in the media spotlight. The reward fund they established eventually grew to over $100,000, contributed by strangers who had been moved by their story and wanted to help bring Tyler home. The Brennan family returned to Denver after 6 months of living in Moab, but their lives had been fundamentally altered by the experience, and their house no longer felt like home without Tyler's presence. They continued making regular trips back to Utah, sometimes weekly during good weather, never completely abandoning their search efforts or their belief that Tyler might still be alive. They established relationships with local law enforcement officers, park rangers, and search and rescue volunteers who continued to watch for any signs of their son during their regular activities in the area. Margaret left her teaching position to dedicate herself full-time to the search effort and advocacy work, while David struggled to maintain his engineering career while managing his consuming obsession with finding Tyler. Their marriage faced enormous strain as they processed their grief differently and disagreed about how to balance hope with acceptance of reality. Margaret threw herself into online research and communication with other families of missing persons, finding some comfort in helping others navigate similar experiences while maintaining her unwavering belief that Tyler would eventually be found. David became increasingly isolated and analytical, spending countless hours studying satellite imagery, weather data, and geological information, while designing increasingly sophisticated search strategies that he hoped might succeed where previous efforts had failed. They attended couples counseling and support groups for families of missing persons, learning coping strategies while never abandoning their commitment to finding answers about what happened to Tyler. Years passed with no credible leads or sightings, despite continued efforts by law enforcement, volunteer searchers, and the Brennan family themselves. Tyler's case file remained open with the National Park Service and local law enforcement agencies, but active investigations ceased as resources were redirected to newer cases with greater potential for resolution. The Brennan family aged visibly under the weight of their loss, their relationship with friends and extended family members complicated by their inability to move forward or accept that Tyler might never be found. They became advocates for improved search and rescue protocols in national parks and lobbied for better funding and training for volunteer search teams, channeling their pain into efforts that might prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. Margaret developed a routine of checking missing persons databases and social media accounts daily, searching for any sign that Tyler might have survived his ordeal and was living under a different identity somewhere in the American Southwest. She created Google alerts for his name and physical description, maintained relationships with age progression artists who updated Tyler's photographs to show what he might look like as he grew older, and she kept an active missing person website with detailed information about the case. David focused on the technical aspects of the search, continuing to analyze topographical data and weather patterns from the day Tyler disappeared, convinced that the right combination of factors and information would eventually lead them to answers, even if those answers came years later than they had hoped. The turning point that would change everything came on a humid Thursday afternoon in July 2023, nearly 12 years after Tyler's disappearance, in what seemed like the most ordinary and unlikely of circumstances. Angela Martinez, a security supervisor at Park Meadows Mall in the Denver suburbs, was reviewing footage from the previous evening when she noticed something that made her pause the video and lean closer to her monitor. A young man in his late 20s had been captured by several cameras as he moved through the busy shopping center, and something about his profile triggered a memory that had been dormant for over a decade. Angela had been working mall security for 15 years and had developed an almost supernatural ability to recognize faces and detect unusual behavior patterns, skills that had helped her identify shoplifters, locate missing children, and assist law enforcement with various investigations over the years. Angela had been following Tyler's case since the beginning, partly because her own nephew was close to Tyler's age when he disappeared, and partly because she had grown up camping in Utah and understood how easy it was for someone to vanish in that unforgiving landscape. She had seen Tyler's photos countless times over the years on missing person websites, age progression images, and anniversary news stories about the case. The man on her security footage bore a striking resemblance to those projections, the same distinctive jawline that had become more pronounced with age, the same way of walking with slightly hunched shoulders that she remembered from video footage of Tyler taken before his disappearance, and most remarkably, the same small scar above his left eyebrow that Tyler had gotten in a childhood skiing accident and that had been prominently featured in all missing person materials. The footage showed the man purchasing items at several stores, paying with cash and avoiding direct eye contact with cashiers or other customers in a way that seemed deliberately careful rather than naturally shy. His behavior seemed methodically cautious, as if he was uncomfortable being in such a public space, but needed to acquire specific items for reasons that weren't immediately apparent. Angela watched the footage multiple times, noting how the man kept his head down and seemed to navigate the mall with purpose rather than browsing casually like most shoppers. His clothing was simple but clean, well-worn jeans that had been carefully maintained, a plain t-shirt in neutral colors, and hiking boots that looked like they had seen years of serious outdoor use but were still functional and sturdy. Angela's experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about this man's demeanor and appearance convinced her that she was looking at someone who had been living off the grid for an extended period. She noted the way he checked his surroundings constantly, how he avoided security cameras when possible, and how he seemed to choose his route through the mall to minimize exposure and contact with other people. The items he purchased were practical and basic. Batteries, basic medical supplies, non-perishable food items, and replacement parts for outdoor equipment, suggesting someone who lived a self-sufficient lifestyle in a remote location. Most telling was his obvious discomfort with the crowded, indoor environment, as if he had become unaccustomed to being around large numbers of people in enclosed spaces. Angela immediately contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, providing them with the clearest images from her security footage, along with detailed reports about the man's behavior patterns and the items he had purchased during his visits to the mall. She also reached out to local law enforcement and specifically requested that her tip be forwarded to any agencies that had worked on Tyler Brennan's case, mentioning her strong suspicion about the man's identity. Her report was thorough and professional, including timestamps, camera angles, and detailed descriptions that demonstrated her experience in security work and her understanding of what information would be most valuable to investigators. Angela's supervisor initially expressed skepticism about her theory, but her track record of accurate observations and successful identifications convinced him to support her efforts to follow up on this potential lead. The case was assigned to Detective Rachel Morrison with the Colorado State Patrol, who had specialized in cold cases involving missing persons for over 15 years and had developed a reputation for solving cases that other investigators had given up on. Morrison was initially skeptical about Angela's tip. The mall received thousands of visitors daily, and the chances of a missing person from Utah randomly appearing at a Colorado shopping center seemed remote at best. However, when she saw the footage and compared it to Tyler's photos and age progression images, she felt the same jolt of recognition that Angela had experienced. Morrison had worked on dozens of missing person cases over her career, and she had learned to distinguish between wishful thinking and legitimate leads based on subtle details that only trained investigators typically noticed. Detective Morrison's investigation began with a comprehensive analysis of the mall's extensive security system, determining that the mysterious man had visited the shopping center on 3 separate occasions over the past month, always during weekday afternoons when crowds were smaller and security presence was reduced. Each visit followed a remarkably similar pattern. He would enter through the main entrance, visit specific stores that sold outdoor gear and basic supplies, make his purchases quickly and efficiently, and leave through a different exit while avoiding the same route twice. The stores he visited included a sporting goods retailer where he purchased camping supplies, a pharmacy where he bought basic medical items and vitamins, and a small electronic shop that specialized in batteries and basic communication devices, suggesting someone who lived independently in a location without reliable power or communication infrastructure. Morrison worked closely with the mall's security team to identify the man's vehicle, eventually spotting an older model pickup truck with deliberately mud-covered license plates parked in different sections of the lot during each visit. The truck appeared to be well-maintained despite its age, with modifications that suggested it was used for serious off-road travel, including reinforced suspension, oversized tires, and additional fuel capacity. The license plate was registered to a fictitious address using false identification, but the vehicle identification number led to a more promising lead when cross-referenced with databases of vehicle sales and registrations. The truck had been purchased with cash from a private seller in Moab, Utah, just 8 months after Tyler's disappearance, a coincidence that seemed too significant to ignore and that immediately elevated the case to high-priority status. The detectives' investigation expanded to include federal agencies with jurisdiction over interstate cases and resources for advanced forensic analysis. She coordinated with the FBI's Missing Persons Unit, which brought sophisticated facial recognition technology and extensive criminal databases to bear on the security footage. The federal investigators were able to enhance the images using advanced software and compare them against millions of photographs in various databases, though the man's apparent efforts to avoid clear facial shots made definitive identification challenging. Morrison also worked with Utah law enforcement to re-examine Tyler's original case file, looking for clues that might explain how a 15-year-old boy could survive in the wilderness for over a decade and what circumstances might have prevented him from making contact with his family or authorities during that time period. The detective's next step was contacting David and Margaret Brennan, a conversation she approached with extreme caution and careful preparation. The family had endured 12 years of false hopes and dead-end leads, including numerous tips from well-meaning individuals who thought they had spotted Tyler in various locations across the country. Morrison knew that raising their expectations without solid evidence would be cruel and potentially damaging to their psychological well-being, so she arranged to meet them in person rather than discussing the case over the phone. She brought printed photographs from the mall security footage and asked them to examine the images without any preconceptions or leading questions, presenting the information as part of a routine investigation rather than expressing her own growing conviction about the man's identity. Margaret's reaction was immediate and visceral when she saw the photographs. She gripped them with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face as she pointed to specific details that only a mother would notice after years of studying every photograph of her missing son. She identified the way the man held his left shoulder slightly higher than his right, a posture that had developed after Tyler broke his collarbone in a skiing accident at age 12 and that had persisted even after the injury healed. She noted the distinctive shape of his hands with unusually long fingers that had made him an excellent guitar player and that were clearly visible in several of the security images. Most convincingly, she spotted a small birthmark on his neck that was visible in one of the clearer photographs, matching exactly the marking that she had kissed goodnight thousands of times during Tyler's childhood, and that was documented in his medical records and missing person files. David's response was more cautious but equally emotional as he studied the images with the analytical mindset that had helped him survive 12 years of false leads and crushing disappointments. He noted the man's estimated height and build, which aligned perfectly with projections of Tyler's adult physique based on his growth patterns at age 15 and the family's genetic history. The facial bone structure, while matured and weathered by years of outdoor living, maintained the fundamental characteristics that David had been studying in age progression software for over a decade. Most importantly to David, the man's eyes held a quality of intelligence and wariness that he recognized from his son's personality, along with a way of observing his surroundings that reflected the outdoor skills and situational awareness that David had worked to develop in Tyler during their years of camping and hiking together. Both parents were struck by subtle details that convinced them they were looking at their son. The way he walked with a slightly forward lean that had been Tyler's characteristic gait since childhood, the manner in which he held his head when concentrating on a task, and even his clothing choices that reflected the practical, outdoor-oriented mindset they had instilled in him. Margaret noted that despite the dramatic changes in his appearance, the man in the photographs maintained the same careful, thoughtful approach to his environment that Tyler had displayed even as a young child. David observed that the man's selection of stores and purchases suggested someone with extensive wilderness experience who was resupplying for extended periods in remote locations, exactly the type of self-sufficient lifestyle that Tyler would be capable of maintaining, given his training and natural abilities. The detective's investigation intensified dramatically as she worked with federal authorities to track the mysterious man's movements and establish his true identity through various databases and surveillance networks. The case attracted attention from multiple FBI units, including the Missing Persons Division, the Fugitive Task Force, and specialized analysts who brought facial recognition technology and behavioral profiling expertise to bear on the available evidence. Meanwhile, Morrison coordinated with Utah law enforcement agencies to re-examine Tyler's original case file with fresh perspective, looking for clues that might explain how a 15-year-old boy could disappear so completely and what circumstances might have motivated him to remain hidden for over a decade rather than making contact with his family or authorities. The breakthrough that finally cracked the case came when investigators discovered that the man had been living under the carefully constructed identity of Michael Torres, working seasonal jobs at remote ranches and mining operations throughout the Southwest where background checks were minimal and cash payments were common. Employment records showed a consistent pattern of short-term work in isolated locations, places where someone could earn enough money to survive while avoiding the documentation and social security verification required for permanent employment. His work history included cattle ranches in Nevada, where he had learned advanced animal husbandry skills, seasonal firefighting crews in Arizona that had provided him with emergency medical training and wilderness survival expertise, and maintenance positions at remote research stations in Utah's desert regions, where he had developed technical skills and access to communication equipment. Each job had been carefully chosen to provide Tyler with skills and resources while maintaining his anonymity and avoiding locations where he might be recognized by tourists or law enforcement officers familiar with his case. His employers universally described him as quiet, reliable, and extremely knowledgeable about desert survival techniques, though many had noticed his reluctance to discuss his past or provide detailed personal information. Several employers had paid him in cash, without requiring social security numbers or formal documentation, a practice that was common in remote areas where seasonal workers were difficult to find and retain. The pattern of his employment showed a systematic approach to building a new life while staying within a geographic region where he could monitor news about his case and ensure that his family remained safe from whatever threats had originally motivated his disappearance. Federal investigators finally located Michael Torres at a small ranch outside Moab, ironically less than 50 miles from where Tyler Brennan had disappeared 12 years earlier. The ranch was owned by an elderly man named Frank Delacroix, a retired mining engineer who had employed Torres for the past 3 years in exchange for maintenance work and livestock care. Delacroix had grown to respect and depend on his quiet employee, who had transformed the struggling ranch into a profitable operation through his knowledge of sustainable ranching practices and his willingness to work long hours in difficult conditions. The ranch owner described Torres as the most reliable worker he had ever employed, someone who could repair complex machinery, handle dangerous animals, and work alone for weeks at a time without supervision or complaint. When federal agents and local law enforcement officers arrived at the ranch, they found Torres working alone in an equipment shed, repairing an irrigation pump with the methodical skill of someone who had learned to fix everything himself through years of necessity. His appearance had changed dramatically from the security footage. He was deeply tanned from constant sun exposure, lean and muscular from years of physical labor, and bore the weathered look of someone who had spent most of his adult life outdoors in harsh conditions. His hands were calloused and scarred from ranch work and machinery repair, and his demeanor was cautious but not hostile as officers identified themselves and asked him to accompany them for questioning. He showed no surprise at their arrival, as if he had been expecting this moment for years and had mentally prepared himself for the inevitable end of his carefully constructed new life. The moment that Margaret Brennan had dreamed about and feared in equal measure finally arrived on a September afternoon at the Colorado State Patrol headquarters in Denver, in a sterile conference room that seemed inadequate for such a momentous occasion. She and David sat across from each other at a metal table, holding hands with white knuckles as Detective Morrison prepared them for what might be the most important conversation of their lives. 12 years of grief, hope, and unanswered questions had led to this moment, and neither parent was certain they were emotionally prepared for what they might learn about their son's disappearance or the reasons he had remained hidden for so long. Their attorney and a victim's advocate were present to provide support and ensure that their rights were protected, while a psychologist specializing in family reunification stood by to help them navigate the complex emotions that were certain to arise. When the door opened and Tyler walked in, accompanied by his own attorney and a federal marshal, the recognition was instantaneous despite the dramatic changes in his appearance that testified to 12 years of hard living in remote locations. He had grown from a gangly teenager into a strong, weathered man with the confident bearing of someone who had survived extraordinary challenges through his own resourcefulness and determination. His face bore new scars and lines that spoke of years spent outdoors, But his eyes remained unmistakably the same, intelligent, cautious, and filled with an emotion that seemed like a mixture of relief and terror. Margaret rose from her chair so quickly that it fell backward, but she stopped short of embracing him, sensing his need for space and recognizing that this reunion was far more complicated than the joyful homecoming she had imagined for over a decade. Tyler's voice, deeper now but with the same careful cadence she remembered from his childhood, broke the silence first, with words that carried the weight of 12 years of separation and survival. "I'm sorry," he said, looking directly at his parents with eyes that held both love and profound sadness. "I'm so sorry for what I put you through. I never wanted to hurt you, but I didn't have any choice." His explanation came slowly, in fragments that revealed a story far more complex and harrowing than anyone had imagined, involving circumstances that had forced a 15-year-old boy to make impossible decisions about his family's safety and his own survival. The day he disappeared, Tyler had indeed wandered off the delicate arch trail, drawn by what appeared to be ancient petroglyphs on a distant rock face that he wanted to photograph for a school project about Native American cultures in the Southwest. He had become lost in the fiery furnace, just as the searchers had suspected, but instead of panicking or making the mistakes that proved fatal for other hikers in similar situations, he had used his survival training to find water and shelter in a hidden alcove that had been carved by centuries of flash floods. What he discovered in that remote location changed the trajectory of his entire life. Clear evidence of illegal activities that made him fear for his safety, and more importantly, for his family's lives if he returned home and revealed what he had witnessed. He had inadvertently stumbled upon a sophisticated drug smuggling operation that used the remote canyon system to move large quantities of narcotics through the region, taking advantage of the maze-like terrain that made detection by law enforcement virtually impossible. The illegal operation Tyler had discovered involved a well-organized network of individuals who used the remote canyon system to smuggle drugs and other contraband through the region, taking advantage of the area's reputation as an impenetrable wilderness where search and rescue operations were difficult and expensive. He had inadvertently photographed several of their faces and license plates while documenting what he thought were interesting rock formations, not realizing that he was recording evidence of criminal activities until it was too late to simply walk away unnoticed. When members of the operation discovered his presence and realized what he had witnessed, they made it clear, through explicit threats, that his silence was the only thing preventing immediate and severe harm to his parents, and potentially to him as well, creating an impossible situation for a 15-year-old boy who had no experience with such dangerous circumstances. Faced with an impossible choice between his own safety and his parents' lives, Tyler made the desperate decision to disappear completely rather than risk exposing his family to retaliation from criminals who had demonstrated their willingness to use violence to protect their operations. Using his wilderness skills and the survival training his father had provided, he managed to evade both the search teams and the criminals, while establishing a new identity and finding work in remote locations where he could monitor news about his case and ensure that his family remained safe. The decision had torn him apart emotionally, but his conviction that revealing himself would endanger his parents had kept him hidden even as he watched from a distance while they suffered through years of uncertainty and grief, knowing that their pain was the price of keeping them alive. The reunion was emotional but complicated, requiring months of careful counseling and extensive legal proceedings to resolve the complex issues surrounding Tyler's disappearance and the criminal activities that had motivated his decision to remain hidden. The drug smuggling network that had held Tyler's silence through threats against his family had been dismantled by federal authorities several years earlier through an unrelated investigation, making his return finally possible without endangering his parents or himself. However, the psychological trauma of 12 years of forced separation and isolation had affected all three family members in ways that would require professional help and considerable time to heal, as they worked to rebuild relationships that had been frozen in time by circumstances beyond their control. The Brennan family began the difficult process of reintegration, while Tyler worked to adjust to a world that had changed dramatically during his 12-year absence from normal society. His story became a testament to both human resilience and the devastating impact that criminal activities can have on innocent families, forever changing law enforcement approaches to missing person cases in areas where illegal operations might be involved. The case led to improved protocols for protecting witnesses who find themselves in similar impossible situations, and highlighted the need for better coordination between search and rescue operations and criminal investigations when missing persons cases occur in areas known for illegal activities. Today, Tyler continues to live quietly with his family in Colorado, working as a wilderness guide and survival instructor, while slowly healing from the trauma of his prolonged isolation and forced separation from everyone he loved. His case led to significant improvements in missing persons protocols in national parks and better protection programs for witnesses who find themselves in dangerous situations beyond their control. The mall security camera that finally brought him home now serves as a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in our lives are captured by the most ordinary technology, waiting years for the right person to notice what everyone else has overlooked, and that families should never give up hope even when circumstances seem impossible to overcome.